Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the newscast. I'm your host, Taylor Bridge, and today we'll be talking about the Salem witch trials from the past to the present. The Salem witch trials were a series of investigations that took place from June 1692 until May of 1693. These trials took place in Salem Village, Massachusetts. Here I have a diagram of the breakup of Salem in Massachusetts. The trials resulted in a total of 19 people being convicted of witchcraft. Witchcraft was thought to be the work of the devil, and anyone caught associated with it was seen to be doing the work of the devil. The 19 people who were accused of being guilty were hanged as punishment for their work with the devil. The Salem witch trials were a huge part of our history, and it is because of these trials that many aspects of our society have changed. The negative effects of these trials was felt by everyone, and it is because of this that our society has changed in order to ensure that history never repeats itself. I have brought here today famous author Emma Johnson to discuss the history of the Salem witch trials and exactly what went on during these times. Hello everyone, my name is Emma Johnson. I am a famous author. I have been brought on the show today to talk to you guys about the history behind the Salem witch trials. These trials began in 1692 when a group of young girls who lived in Salem Village, Massachusetts, accused several women in the town of witchcraft. It was in January of 1692 when two young girls, Abigail Williams and Elizabeth Paris, were diagnosed by a doctor with bewitchment. This means that they were bewitched by someone in the town who is involved with witchcraft. Following the diagnosis of these two young girls, other girls in the village became experiencing the same fits. These fits include violent contortions and uncontrollable outbursts of screaming. It was then that these young girls accused three young women of bewitching them, claiming to be possessed by the devil. It was in late February that arrest warrants were sent out for the arrest of the three young women allegedly responsible for these children's outbreaks. The three young women responsible were Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. It was after these three women were brought to court that the Salem witch trials officially began. It wasn't until June of 1962 that the first case took place in the Grand Court. The original first three women who were accused were thrown in jail, but they were not hanged until July. Bridget Bishop was the first case brought before the grand jury. Bridget Bishop was found guilty of witchcraft. She was the first to be hanged, and the date marks June 10, 1692. Following the hanging of Bridget Bishop in June, an additional 5 people were hanged in July, including Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, 2 of the 3 girls involved in the original accusations of witchcraft. Another 5 people were hanged in August, and the last 8 in September. This makes for a total of 19 people who were hanged, 12 of which were women. Okay, I'm going. Mama, some people just don't know when it's their time to leave. Well, now y'all must be wondering who I am. I am Anne Burnaby, and I am here to finish the segment. Although there were no more hangings after September of 1692, the trials still continued until May of 1693. Now, during these trials, there were 2 major changes to the court. The first of these occurred in May of 1692. Governor William Phips named a special court of oyer, which means to hear, and terminate, which means to decide. This court allowed for spectral evidence, which means that the accusers were allowed to use their dreams and their visions as evidence against the accused. Due to this allowance of spectral evidence that this court was dissolved on October 29th of 1692. This court was replaced by the Special Court of Judicature. This court did not allow for spectral evidence to be used. Due to this change in the court, only 3 of the 56 defendants accused were condemned and sent to jail. When the trials came to an end in May of 1693, there was a total of 19 people hanged, 200 people accused, 1 poor man who was pressed to death by stones for refusing to enter a plea, and 5 people who died in custody waiting to be released. The aftermath of the trials was filled with pain and many public apologies. Attempts made by the government to make amends was large, but the pain caused by the trials can never be undone. Up next in the segment, I have world-renowned scientist Rebecca Stone here to talk about the aftermath of the Salem witch trials and exactly what goes on in our society today and what happened shortly after the trials ended. My name is Rebecca Stone. I am a world-renowned scientist. I specialize in chemistry, and I'm here to talk to you about the aftermath of the Salem witch trials. After the Salem witch trials had come to an end in 1693, there was a lot of talk and discussion in society about the consequences of the trial. It was not until January 14th of 1697 that the first public announcement regarding the Salem witch trials was made. On this day, the General Court of Massachusetts declared it to be a day of fasting in honor of the families involved in the Salem witch trials. Samuel Sewall was one of the judges in the trial and was the first person involved in the witch trials to publicly acknowledge his error and guilt in the proceedings. It was in 1702 that the Salem witch trials were declared unlawful by the Governor William Phips and the General Court of Massachusetts. From there, in 1706, Anne Putnam, who was one of 6 accusers in the trial, was the first and only accuser to publicly apologize for her role in the trials. Several years later, in 1711, 22 out of the 33 people who were convicted were publicly exonerated by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It wasn't until many centuries later that the Salem witch trials were brought up again publicly. In 1957, the state of Massachusetts formally apologized for the events of 1692. On May 9, 1992, the Salem Village Witchcraft Victims Memorial of Denver's was presented and dedicated to the families and the victims of the Salem witch trials. The final public announcement regarding the Salem witch trials was made on November 1st, 2001, when the remaining 11 individuals who were convicted were fully exonerated by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. However, many theories were brought to life on account of these trials. The first of these theories comes from the question of why the girls made their accusations in the first place. From here, the question of whether or not they actually experienced what they claimed or whether they were simply just acting comes into play. The theory surrounds the idea that they were just simply acting from the start, that they did not actually experience any part of what they claimed. This was thought to be the case because the families of the accusers would actually benefit from their children claiming to be possessed by the devil. When the girls made their accusations that they were being possessed by the devil and put the blame on the 3 young women in their town, their families would benefit from this. If a person was convicted of witchcraft and found guilty, their fortunes and their land was put up for auction to be won by other people in the village. This brings to light the idea that the girls would act and claim that their neighbors were bewitching them as a way for their parents to obtain their land and fortune. Although a strong theory, it was never proven to be true, and the question of whether or not the girls actually experienced what they claimed still remains unanswered. To finish off this segment, we have Helen Bloomwood here to talk about the connection of The Crucible by Arthur Miller to the Salem witch trials. Hello everyone, my name is Helen Bloomwood and I am a world-renowned book critic here to talk to you about the connection of The Crucible by Arthur Miller to the Salem witch trials of 1692. Arthur Miller's The Crucible is a play written using the Salem witch trials as a way of explaining the communist hysteria experienced in the 1950s. This direct relation is shown in 2 ways. The first is the discussion of witchcraft and the hangings in the play. This topic was first brought up at the very beginning of the play during a conversation between Abigail Williams and Mary Warren. I will now read a direct passage from The Crucible demonstrating this conversation. Mary Warren in conversation with Abigail Williams.
I just come from the farm. The whole country's talking witchcraft. They'll be calling us witches, Abby. Abby, we've got to tell. Witchery's a hangin' error, a hangin' like they done in Boston 2 years ago. We must tell the truth, Abby. You'll only be whipped for dancing and the other things.
Miller, page 5. This conversation between Mary and Abigail is directly related to the topic of witchcraft and as well mentions the consequences of being associated with it, which is being hanged. The entire play surrounds the convictions of any person involved in witchcraft, which is precisely the basis for the Salem witch trial. However, aside from the topic of the play pertaining precisely to the convictions of witches and their hangings, Arthur Miller also used the exact names of the girls and the people involved in the Salem witch trial. As previously stated earlier on in the show, during the segment of the history of the Salem witch trials, these investigations began when 2 young girls, one being Abigail Williams, accused 3 young women of bewitching them. Abigail confesses to her partaking in the summoning of the devil, and in this confession names the 3 women she saw at the time. I will now read Abigail's confession directly from the crucible. The confession reads,
I want to open myself. I want the light of God. I want the sweet love of Jesus. I danced for the devil. I saw him. I wrote in his book. I go back to Jesus. I kiss his hand. I saw Sarah Good with the devil. I saw Good Osborne with the devil. I saw Bridget Bishop with the devil.
Miller, page 15. In this confession, Miller used 2 of the 3 exact names of the women who were accused of bewitching the young girls in the real Salem witch trial. As well, Miller made mention to the first victim of the Salem witch trials, Bridget Bishop. As previously stated in this segment, The Crucible by Arthur Miller is directly related to the Salem witch trials. The Crucible was written as a parallel to the experiences of Arthur Miller during the 1950s, during a time known as the suppression of communism. And we're back. Hello everyone, I'm Taylor Bridge, here to close out this segment on the Salem witch trials, from the past to the present. Salem witch trials were a series of investigations that took over and consumed the Salem village and its inhabitants in the late 1600s. These trials were filled with false accusations and lies. These investigations came a dark period for the state of Massachusetts. The Salem witch trials left a mark in history that can never be forgotten. And that is it for today's segment on the Salem witch trials, from past to the present.